à-bas-le-ciel.
Of course, I condemn someone going on a, terroristic, suicidal gun rampage. It's very easy for me to condemn. However, I do think the necessary next step is to point out this killing spree, this attempted killing spree, this suicidal killing spree, was not about veganism. This is someone who happened to be a vegan YouTuber and vegan activist. Her fundamental grievance was about money. To quote the little-known rapper 50 Cent, it usually goes down over money and whores. Guess what, people? This video is going to talk about YouTube. It's going to talk about vegan activism. It's going to talk about the psychology of vegan activists. It's going to talk about a shooting that recently grabbed headlines. But it shouldn't be too much of a surprise that in the end, the motivation and the moral issue we have to talk about is money.
À-bas-le-ciel.
So I got a bunch of emails like this one from supporters on Patreon and fans of the channel who have other ways to contact me. Quote, looking forward to your response regarding the YouTube shooter and the media's reporting the event. I've only seen 3 responses from vegan YouTubers thus far, and they all have been quick to deflect blame from this woman advocating on behalf of veganism. Now, look, I'm surprised that so many people wrote to me wanting my opinion on this. It seems like the opinion he wants to hear from me is that, acts of suicidal terrorism are bad. Now, I can provide that service. I can tell you exactly what you want to hear. Yes, I am of the opinion that acts of suicidal terrorism are bad. I would say that many of these other YouTubers, the ones listed here and others, known and unknown to me, they're probably not coming out and making a statement on that just because it's so obvious that it seems needless or gauche. I took a hard stand against violence when it was being preached by Gary Yourofsky. And at that time, Gary Yourofsky was one of the most influential and charismatic leaders in the vegan movement. So that was a hard position to take, and some people hated me for taking it, and I showed clips of him talking about and endorsing violence. And I said, look, guys, we all need to wake up and oppose this kind of activism, whether or not it actually is violent in itself or whether or not people actually take inspiration from this and engage in acts of violent terrorism. We need to really come out in a strong, clear position opposed to this kind of violence. Both many years ago and more recently, I've spoken out against the, very theoretical and hypothetical violence of a person like Vegan Gains, which isn't actual violence. I mean, he's not actually doing anything violent, but where he is, threatening people on camera and pointing guns at the camera and sometimes getting out knives on camera while threatening things. I said, no, we got to draw a line against this. But in those circumstances, it does seem like there's some function for myself as a commentator in the digital demimonde of vegan activism to take a position on this. There's a point in me also criticizing groups like Direct Action Everywhere, PETA, on and on the list goes. But I have to say, with something like this, I think many people are not going to condemn it just because it does seem so obvious that nobody wants to take a stand, take a moral stand, put their foot down and say, hey, guess what? Shooting others, shooting yourself is bad. This kind of act of suicidal terrorism is a terrible thing for veganism, and it's also a terrible way to protest the injustice of how YouTube does business, which is, I think, here very clearly the real issue to be addressed. This wasn't a vegan protest. This was a protest against the business practices of YouTube Corporation. So, as I said in the intro, it's about money.
Usually goes down over money and horse.
However, vegan spokespersons should first and foremost condemn the act, which none of these 3 did. The woman shut up YouTube because the medium was interfering with her ability to spread the vegan message. I'll come back to that. I think that's not really the issue, having looked at our own website and having looked at coverage. In some respects, we as vegans are culpable and should self-police to a greater extent. Well, I wouldn't put it that way, no. But several people have come forward and made the claim that there's no meaningful connection between this act of violence and veganism, politically, psychologically, otherwise, and I wouldn't agree with that either. What is the connection? Why does this matter for veganism? What does veganism have to do with it? Look, a lot of people involved in veganism care about justice. And I've heard many vegans passionately claim that we should make the case for the future of the vegan movement entirely on the basis of a kind of justice. often they want to articulate it in terms of a slave rebellion, a slave uprising's justice in lashing out for vengeance against the slave owners. I mean, really, this is one school of thought within vegan political discourse. And I disagree with that approach root and branch. Like, I disagree with it in theory. I disagree with it in principle. I disagree with it in terms of the rhetoric. I also disagree with it in practice. And most of those people, when I talk to them face-to-face or via Skype or via email, as soon as I start talking to them a bit, they haven't actually studied the history of slave rebellions and slave liberation movements and so on. But the sense of justice and injustice, that very brittle, and I think I can frankly say self-righteous tendency within veganism, that's part of what attracts a certain type of person to veganism in the first place. And then once they're within the vegan movement, that element of their character can kind of blossom, can become a major part of their daily life, whereas before maybe it was a minor or peripheral part of their character or life, right? This is the behavior and the kind of moral posturing that gets rewarded. Now, in the same sense, like, keep in mind, I'm not really singling out veganism here. Veganism is a movement that means a lot to me. I'm vegan myself, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, if you knew someone in high school who kind of seemed like an average kid, and then you meet him 20 years later, and, you know, he's joined a charismatic Christian cult where every day he's preaching certain moral virtues. Every day, let's say, he's going out and warning people that, you know, the world is going to end, that the vision published in the book of Revelation and the New Testament of the Bible, this is imminently about to happen. You know, certain elements of his character that you might recognize from when you knew him in high school have, in a sense, they've been exercised. You know, they've become a greater and greater part of what's manifest, what's visible in the type of person he is. It's drawn out, exaggerated, and exacerbated, perhaps, certain characteristics yet. In the same way, for a lot of people, even though they might have some of these tendencies, they might have some of these passions, caring about justice and injustice, their involvement with the vegan movement is going to exacerbate, exaggerate, and exercise some of these tendencies, which may be why they got involved with vegans in the first place. That's not the case for all vegans. My girlfriend, Melissa, like myself, really the first step that brought her into veganism was an interest in ecology. That's true for me also. I think anyone who's really thinking in a systematic and honest way about ecology is going to step by step become interested in veganism. But for other people, I mean, I know one girl here in Canada, and for her it was just the shock of opening a cardboard box full of chicken. So, you know, butchered chicken, ready-to-eat chicken from the grocery store, and there were some feathers in the box. Seeing the feathers on the flesh of this, you know, chicken in the box was a moment of horrific realization for her. She suddenly felt incredibly revolted by all meat, and then she started asking questions. There are different people who take different roads to veganism, and, you know, to some extent those reflect the type of characters who are signing up for veganism at this stage. So yes, but this issue of justice and injustice, it's a very dangerous thing, and it has been since Plato. Since Plato wrote The Republic, often a book that's often given the subtitle On the Meaning of Justice. It's a terrible book, by the way. Plato's Republic. You have to read it, but I don't recommend reading it. Unfortunately, it's required reading. But, terrible book. Look, I talk to people all the time about the situation of my divorce and my trying to spend quality time with my daughter. My perspective on that is of doing the best I can. These are the circumstances, these are the laws, these are the rights and responsibilities, these are the financial constraints and the time constraints. Given all these factors, what is the best I can do? I'm trying to do something positive. I look at the situation in that sense. And when I talk to other people who regard it in terms of justice and injustice, I notice their sense of motivation is radically different from my own. They respond to it with a sense of moral outrage and anger and becoming despondent. And it's not even their divorce. It's not even their daughter. It's my situation. But I feel more positively about it because I'm just looking at it in terms of me doing the best I can do. I'm not looking at it in terms of justice, and an ethic of justice very often is a layer of shiny blue paint on top of an ethic of revenge. Okay, so in some respects, we as vegans are culpable and should self-police to a greater extent. For example, condemning the violent diatribes of vegan gains, etc. At the very least, we should condemn acts of violence tied to spreading the vegan message before rationalizing our defenses. What are your thoughts? Here, by contrast, is one of my other Patreon supporters who just says laconically, PETA will love this because it gets the word vegan in the headlines. So, I mean, he's joking, of course, but the joke, you know, has teeth. The joke definitely has a political punchline worth noting. Nazim Sabs, she was successful on YouTube. So let's be very clear. She was not someone who was struggling to have a voice on YouTube. She was not someone who was struggling to be heard rather than ignored. She did have a big following. She did have a big audience, although that audience was primarily not English speaking. That audience was largely linked to Iranian diaspora, and people who are in Iran itself. However, she was getting hundreds of thousands of views per video. So her situation, psychologically, politically, even economically, is very different from someone who's struggling to get those first 500 regular viewers. The struggle, however, as pointed out on her own website, it very clearly was about money. So she had an example of a video that had 300,000 views, and YouTube only granted her 10 cents worth of revenue. Now, on my own channel, a hit video, a smash hit video, generates $1 of revenue for me, right? But a smash hit video on my channel is maybe 5,000 viewers. So this month, I do have one smash hit video that has already generated $1. Now, I would generate more revenue, I don't know how much more, if my videos were not being constantly censored, restricted, and demonetized by YouTube, right? But as you've probably guessed, I'm not in it for the money. I mean, if I were motivated by money, everything about this channel would be very different, including this discussion I'm having with you now, right? As I say again and again, I feel like on YouTube, honesty is the only currency we've got. I'm here to give you something real. I don't have any set. I don't have any plot. I don't have a story to tell. What I've got to share with you is my real life. And there's a lot to talk about coming into that real life, politically, personally, philosophically, and otherwise. But I'd rather come on here and do book reviews. I'm still reading books all the time. Something real, something that reflects what's going on in my life, what I've been reading about and thinking about. I'm not interested in the type of artifice that would earn more money for me on YouTube. However, with all that having been said, just as a caveat, very clearly, if I can earn $1 out of 5,000 views, another YouTuber like Nazim Sabs has a very clear grounds for a grievance in that she has 300,000 views on a video and she is earning much, much less than $1 for every 5,000 views, right? So I have read the justifications from YouTube for why it is that their payment per view is so inconsistent and, in a word, prejudicial. Those explanations are not good enough. If you're an employee at Starbucks and you know somebody else gets paid more than you to fill up a certain number of cups of coffee, to work for a certain number of hours a day, you have every right to ask, hey, why is it that he gets paid more than I do? Why is it that she gets paid less than I do? What are the grounds for this inequality, right? If you have a system, a structured system of content distribution like YouTube, I think everyone involved in playing the game would accept it if the amount they were earning were now lower than what it is now, but was fair and consistent. Where you could say, hey, all right, you know what? I make $1 out of every 5,000 views, and I know that if someone else decides to do some other kind of content, they also make $1 for every 5,000 views. Fair is fair, right? We can all play by the same rules. We can all have an even playing field. Instead, what YouTube has done is to set up an unequal and uneven playing field that is constantly egregiously hurtful to all the people playing on it. Now, look, I can talk about my own feelings in this. It's probably not people who are looking for on this channel. I have heard very successful YouTubers talk about their own sense of frustration that they can have a much more successful video in terms of the audience response, or an artistically successful video, or a video that's successful in terms of what they can see in terms of their audience's appreciation of it, that earns them much less money than some other video that was unsuccessful and disliked by the audience, but somehow generated more revenue. The sense that there is no meaningful link between the quality of their output and the quantity of what they get paid, this can be quite demoralizing, even for very successful YouTubers who really do pay their rent. What the case study of Nazim Saab shows you is that people who are down at the low end of the scale, people who are getting 10 cents for a video that has 300,000 views on it, they also are left with a terrible sense of injustice. And in this case, she decided to take the layer of paint off of injustice, or off of the concept of justice and injustice, and to simply pursue revenge. Now, do I believe that is morally wrong? Of course. I've already said in this video, of course I condemn someone going on a, terroristic, suicidal gun rampage. It's very easy for me to condemn. However, I do think the necessary next step is to point out this killing spree, this attempted killing spree, this suicidal killing spree, was not about veganism. This is someone who happened to be a vegan YouTuber and vegan activist. Her fundamental grievance was about money. I remember there was a case in New York of a couple of homicides linked to Quebecois importers of Christmas trees. These are guys who cut down trees in Quebec and haul them to New York City and sell them to people so that people in New York who live in apartments and condominiums can have a real Christmas tree, a living tree dragged down. And, I think a lot of it, these guys, don't pay taxes. It's this kind of an underground, semi-illegal industry. And once in a while, there are disputes between these guys and they kill each other. And I'll always remember it was an interview with a local cop who said, look, can you believe it? People are killing each other over Christmas trees? And the police officer said, of course. There's money involved. Anything like this, it's the human heart. And, to quote 50 Cent, it usually goes down over money and hoes. Whether it's a love triangle, a broken heart, or, it's a broken wallet, these are the things that generally do drive people to homicidal acts of self-destruction.
À-bas-le-ciel.